Child sacrifice. Barbaric. Evil. Ancient. Modern. There's nothing new under the sun. Throughout history, children have been sacrificed to a variety of deities in attempts to gain favor or blessings. Aztecs cut their children's hearts out to appease the gods of rain and war. Incas sacrificed their children to the sun god so their crops would flourish. Canaanites sacrificed their infants to Moloch for prosperity. Drums were played loudly to drown out the baby's screams. Child sacrifice never stopped, and we still don't hear their screams. There's nothing new under the sun. We sacrifice our children today, not for rain or war victories, but for freedom or convenience. We sacrifice to gain favor in the workplace, or for the blessings of money or fame. We sacrifice our babies on the altar of free sex. Child sacrifice is no longer a public event. It's done behind closed doors. Rather than a gory burning or bloody stabbing, it's become a neat, sterile, and clinical event. We don't throw our children into the fire or leave them to freeze to death. We starve our babies. We poison them. We rip off their arms and legs and crush their skulls. We call it choice. We call it empowerment. And our culture condones it. We celebrate it. We celebrate baby murder. We consider it vital to our existence. It's become a right. But nothing is different. There's nothing new under the sun. Innocent human beings are still being sacrificed for the selfish gains of those more powerful. Modern child sacrifice is thriving. We must end it. End abortion.
Meanwhile, we're going to see millions of people voting to allow more of that. And for what? Because you think you're owed someone else's money. So you want to take it by raising taxes so you can get your quote unquote free college or quote unquote free health care because you lack the personal responsibility to do it yourself. You dislike some tweets or how the president talks, or maybe because you're scared of guns, and because of that, let's infringe on law-abiding citizens' rights to self-defense. Or maybe you've been protesting over a minuscule portion of tragic or fatal interactions with law enforcement, believing this country is so racist, when in reality you're living in one of the least racist countries in the world. Yet all these issues are irrelevant if our children are not given the chance to live.
From the highways of America, here's the podcast where we talk politics, a little entertainment, some culture, and this and that, from the road to your ears. This is Trend Chat with your host, Brian Bledsoe.
All right, we're skipping the applause. So just thank you to listening to another episode of Trend Chat. I'm your host, Brian Bledsoe. And we're going to, just like I said in the previous episode, this is 2 episodes pretty much almost back to back. And this episode is about voting your theology, if you already seen the title. And so I'm not going to say too much. We're going to get right into it. But because the interview is going to take up the majority of this episode, I guess I would just put out the promos right now, as opposed to playing the promos I normally play. I would just mention about especially TrumpMud.com. So, cause there's a possibility after this, after this episode, who knows what will become as far as all the stuff. But anyway, TrumpMud.com. And if you go to TrumpMud.com and put in the code Trend Chat, you get 10% off. They got mugs, hats, all sort of Trump-centric gear. 1776united.com. Put in the code Trend Chat, get 20% off on patriotic shirts, mugs, hoodies, and other accessories. Also, Cultural Life, 1972, COL 1972, the letter COL 1972.com. Put in the code Trend Chat there, get 10% off. So, fashion line for life, that is pro-life, a pro-life fashion line. And just trying to cultivate a cultural life, which, as you heard in the beginning, we seem like we're doing the opposite of that. So, our guest is Jerod Gilcher. He is a pastor at Christ Community Bible Church. I've been going there when I can, when I'm back in town, and I'm ecstatic to have him on, because this episode turned out to be a lot better than how I was already planning this episode before the election. And I'm just, in God's sovereignty and being blessed to have this opportunity at this particular time to actually get a chance to talk with him about these things. And so, yeah, this interview was recorded last month, given this is November 1st. I actually was going to post this on the 31st. But so, as being a trucker, we're recording in Houston, Texas, and I was going to do it last night, but one of the aspects is being on the road is where you park, and I parked last night at a place that tended to not be so, at least didn't sound safe, put it that way, because as soon as I parked, all I was hearing were gunshots in a distance. It wasn't close, but still hearing gunshots, it's kind of hard to fall asleep when you're hearing gunshots for like an hour or two. That's kind of how long it was going. I mean, it wasn't like a steady stream, but it was every couple of minutes. It would pop, pop, pop. I mean, yeah. So I had to move around, and one just, stay alert as far as where I was. So anyway, that delayed me doing it. So I'm doing it this morning on November 1st. I'm just putting that out there because you're going to hear about us, because we're going to talk about the Reformation. Like I said, a number of things we're going to talk about. And so that's one of them. And so it's kind of centered on October, but look, we're close enough. So anyway, without further ado, here's the interview with Jerod. Hello, this is Trend Chat, and we are very pleased to have Jerod Gilcher with us. He is the pastor at Christ Community Bible Church in Arlington, Texas, and been looking forward to have him on to talk about a number of issues. We're going to talk about voting your theology and the Reformation, and maybe some other things. So, how you doing?
Oh, so good. Thanks for having me on here, man.
So, before we get into anything, I think it's, especially in this day and age, not even in the past couple of years, it's just something that I've noticed when it comes to just talking about anything, whether it's theology or just any sort of discussion. It's best to just lay out the terms, because even though me and you may be thinking similar, people that are listening maybe have a whole other way of thinking when it comes to this. So first thing, as I mentioned, like, we're going to talk about voting your theology. And, in the words of R.C. Sproul, who has had a book called Everyone is a Theologian, and everyone has a view about God, whether you believe he exists or not, or he or she, or whether it's multiple, or if God is a Muslim or Christian. Like, we all have a study or view of God, which is literally what theology means. Theo meaning God, and logi, the study of. And the question of whether your theology is informed or not and is true or not. So I just want to lay that out so you can go with that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you're right, man. You're right. Yeah, we all do. Whether we realize it or not, we all have a world view, and we all have lenses through which we make sense out of the world. As what some would call an evangelical Christian, I understand from the Bible that that we all have lenses through which we view the world, that God has made us to be interpreters, and that, like you said, I think you're exactly right. We do have a theology, and that even plays into the kind of things we're going to talk about tonight, right? Like voting. I mean, we are all voting our theology in one way or another. So, yeah, I think you're right to set that at the outset.
And also, and the other thing something that I've mentioned a couple of times on the podcast is that we're coming from a view of objective truth, absolute truth.
Yeah.
So that's where we're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to expand on that, as far as, I'm pretty sure you can give a better explanation than I've been given in the past couple of weeks.
No, you're right, though. That's exactly right. I mean, for, anyone who's listening to this, obviously, you and I would welcome a really great discussion about truth issues, right? And just because, you and I would, claim that the Bible gives absolute truth, that, the Bible makes truth claims, and those truth claims are validated by history. Those truth claims are validated by internal consistency. The Bible is consistent with itself. But that's exactly right. Coming from the standpoint of absolute truth, that the Bible is God's inspired word, right? So, everything that I am going to say tonight, and again, and I think you're so wise to put this out there. Look, let's say where we're coming from at the outset, where I'm coming from. And anything that we're going to talk about tonight is I'm coming from the perspective of that the Bible is the inspired, inerrant, authoritative revelation from the living God, that God has spoken and revealed himself in a book, and that book matches with the facts of history, and it is internally consistent, and that through the truths revealed through that book reveal not only the authoritative stance on moral issues, but even more than that, that the Bible gives us, reveals to us who God is, and even what comes after death, and how to have what the Bible calls eternal life. So that's very much for us. For me, that's the deal breaker. That's the biggest issue in the universe.
Again, we're in an age right now where you have influencers and people who have blue check marks by their name on social media, talking about what is their truth or what is my truth. And so since we're in that right now, that's why I wanted to, say this is where we're coming from. Yeah. We're not saying like this is my truth. We're saying this is the truth.
Precisely. Yeah, absolutely. And, but again, I mean, although, I would die for that. I would die for objective, absolute truth, and that the Bible is that. I think another thing that's missing is, the willingness to dialogue with people like you and I. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I mean, I really want to have these kinds of conversations with people who disagree. And because to me, truth issues are just so worth talking about. I mean, and this is probably not, the point of the direction you wanted this thing to go, but I just think you're bringing up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're just bringing up really good stuff. So I guess my point is for anyone listening to this, who would be tempted to be turned off by, this kind of stuff. It's like, you know what? If you disagree with this, man, I would love to hear why. I want to dialogue with you. I want to talk about these things because eternity is worth having a spirited discussion about, right? We need to talk about these things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I've heard this. I forgot where, but eternity is a long time to be wrong about something.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
So I mean, if you're someone that even believes in eternity, regardless of even going and talking about theology, but if you just believe in eternity, I will hope you are really set on what it is, because I mean, like I said, that's a long time to be wrong about it.
Yeah. You better be persuaded of a position, right? It's not something to be taken lightly.
Hey everybody, it is Chad Prather, host of the Chad Prather Show. You are listening to Trend Chat with my man, Brian Bledsoe. Come on with it.
Hello, Trend Chat fans. The Founding Project invites you to experience our latest resource to take civics to citizens, TFP's new website. Visit us at www.thefoundingproject.com. Be a part of the civics movement with the Founding Project. The Founding Project is a 501c3 education nonprofit. Join us today.
So, as I mentioned in the beginning, one thing we're going to talk about is voting your theology, and it's something that you mentioned to me. So, what do you mean by voting your theology? I mean, is it something that's going to be a sermon later on, or what?
That's a good question. Yeah. I'm definitely going to mention this to my own people, my own congregation. Something that I've heard be thrown around in a good way. It's a good phrase, but it's, vote your conscience. Vote your conscience. Mm-hmm. That's typically something that you hear said from up front. Pastors are, I'm not even sure if they're allowed, nor do I think it's a good idea to give people, hey, okay, you should vote for this guy, and then say the politician's name. But typically what's thrown around is, vote your conscience. And I thought, that's true. Our voting decisions are conscience decisions, but our consciences need to be shaped by theology. Our consciences need to be shaped by objective, absolute truth. In other words, what we feel in our hearts must be shaped and produced by objective, absolute truth that God Himself has revealed. So when I say vote your theology, I mean make voting decisions based off a theologically informed conscience. So that's what I'm after. So that biblical principles would shape and govern and guide how you vote.
I guess one thing, for one, so if you're looking at it from a theological point of view about how you vote, and now comes to politics, there are just so many individual issues. Yeah. Where so a book that I mentioned a couple of times on the podcast that I refer to often is a book from Wayne Grudem called Politics According to the Bible. Mm-hmm. And in that large reference book, basically, because it's not like a novel, it's just basically a reference book, because it breaks down a whole bunch of issues and you could just kind of pick and choose out of the book. And so you have all these issues, whether we're talking about abortion or just war or take immigration, take your pick. If someone is looking to want to vote biblically or as you say, to vote your theology, with all these issues, how do you prioritize what is what's the top priority and what's, so.
Exactly. Brian, that's a fantastic question. That's the issue, right? And for most people, myself included, there are so many different things to know and keep track of, so many, nuanced issues out there in the world of politics. How can you keep it all straight, right? There's a reason why political science is a major. There's a reason why, the rabbit hole of politics is so deep, and there's no end to what you would have to, what you could learn. But I think what you could do, Brian, is I think you could boil it down to a few principles, a few things that would sort of, that if you had these things down, you wouldn't necessarily have to know everything about everything to do good, well-informed voting. So, for instance, here's what I mean. I think at the outset, and again, this is speaking from a Christian perspective, but I think when it comes to voting, there are three components at the outset that I think we should keep in mind. Three components that as a Christian, I want to keep in mind, but before I cast my vote. And so this is like the starting point, foundation. Before I even think about individual issues, these are the three things that I want to think about. First, there's a witness component. There's a witness component to voting. And by witness, I mean, it's like, okay, well, let's take the president or, whatever government position that is going to influence the church, it's like, okay, I'm going to vote for a candidate who is going to have policies that will enable us to worship how the Bible calls us to worship. So call it freedom of religion if you like, but with the witness component, the worship component. The first one is the worship component. Whatever candidate is out there, I'm going to vote for one who is going to grant religious freedom, right? The Bible calls us to worship in a particular way. And so I'm going to be, voting for a candidate who's going to, affirm that, even if they're not a Christian. That's where I'm going to, my vote is going to lean, is to someone who is going to allow us to worship in the way that God calls us to. The second component is the witness component.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I feel like when you said that, I'm trying to think from the other side, like what would they say? And as soon as you said, even if they're not a Christian, if someone listening, like, so what if the person is an atheist?
Yeah, well, same deal, right? I would be really troubled by a candidate who would be like, well, I'm going to allow, I don't know if this is what you meant, but I'm going to allow Christians to worship the way they want. But an atheist, they're going to be, it's like, no, you know what? This has to be, that's what makes America unique, is that people can make those decisions. People can have that freedom to choose who or what to worship or not worship at all. And so I think, granting freedom to worship or not worship to anybody and everybody, if that's what you meant.
Yeah, well, I was just like, if that candidate was an atheist.
Oh, I see.
But they still will. But even though they're atheists, they would, I guess, put in their platform that they would upheld religious liberty, even though they don't believe.
Exactly, and I would even find that highly respectable if they were an atheist and they took that position. Now, if I had to choose, Brian, if I had two candidates to choose from, and one was a confessing Christian, and the other one was a confessing atheist, it's like, okay, well, I'm probably going to lean towards the Christian, because they're going to have a worldview that I'm more in line with, and I'm going to agree with, and so if I had to choose between those two, but again, there's other issues to consider as well.
Yeah.
But absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, but I just I was just thinking like if someone else, a liberal or whatever, would think like, well, but yeah, but continue.
Question. Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, interrupt any time, man. I don't want to make this a monologue. So that's the worship component. The other component that we have to consider is the witness component. In other words, I really believe that voting, that Christian voters, that there is an aspect of the way we vote is a form of being salt and light. What I mean is, us Christians voting for candidates or policies or different things that are going to reflect our worldview, I believe that those are glimmers and shimmers of light, and it is little samples of salt. Christ calls us in Matthew 5:16 to be light of the world and to be salt of the world. And so when we vote, even if what we want to happen doesn't get voted in, right? So if it doesn't swing the way we want, I still think voting is valuable, because we are still making a statement to our representatives like, look, there are people under your rule, under your jurisdiction, who hold this view, and you need to account for that. We are a part of the people that you are called to lead and represent, and so in voting, we're making a statement about things that we feel matter. So I think there's a real witness component to voting also. So that's the second component.
So before you go into the third one, and just in hearing that, because regardless of the results, because I don't know, I think I maybe mentioned to you when we had a conversation a while ago, is like one of my favorite quotes is, "The duty is ours, and the results are God's."
Yes.
And so whether it's whether it's just voting or just whether it's block walking or doing whatever, but we do the work. and leave the results up to God. So
precisely. That's so well put, Brian. It's like, we believe that God is in sovereign control over all things, right? And yet that doesn't minimize or rule out the responsibility to vote and to be responsible, which actually brings me to the third component, which is the worldview component. And by that I mean that, we as Christians, me and other Christians, we vote with particular things about our worldview that inform how we view voting. For instance, Christians vote as, yes, citizens of America, but also Philippians chapter 3 says that we are citizens of heaven. So we have a dual citizenship. We are citizens of heaven, and we just happen to live here in America. And so the point is we cast our votes knowing that even if it doesn't go the way we want, it's like, we are not staking our identity. We are not staking our ultimate joy. We are not staking our ultimate happiness on the political world going the way we want it. Of course, we want things to, we want things to go according to our worldview, but, we are citizens of a heavenly kingdom, and so therefore that's what we're living for. The other part, too, as far as our worldview component, is that, Matthew 28:18, Christ says that he has all authority in heaven and on earth. And so this kind of goes to your point, where it's like, Christ rules everything. He rules everything. There's nothing left to chance. There's no such thing as luck. There's no such thing as coincidence. Christ rules every single detail in the universe. And so therefore, when we cast our vote, we know that no matter how the outcome plays out, he is in absolute sovereign control. I mean, you think about, the different political leaders that Christians had to be under throughout history. You think about Nero in the first century. That was not a great situation, right? That was not at all. Nero was a terrible ruler from the perspective of, he was psychotic and full of himself and murdered people and yet the early believers had the absolute confidence that Jesus Christ rules everything. And then the third part of the worldview component is that, we as Christians, we know where human history is headed. We know that even if everything took a total nosedive and got as bad as they possibly could, even if tomorrow, the second Stalin rose up and took over the country and built gulags and killed 20 million of his own people, at the end of the day, Christians know that where human history is headed, the finish line of human history is a kingdom in which Jesus Christ rules all things and makes all things the way they ought to be. So with the witness component, the worship component, and the worldview component, those are really the lenses I feel that believers ought to look at voting. It's like, okay, we're gonna vote because we want to be a witness. We want to vote because we want freedom to worship how God calls us to worship. And then we're going to vote according to a worldview that is persuaded that we are not placing our ultimate hope in a presidential candidate or any other candidate for that matter. We are placing all of the eggs of our hope in the basket of the supremacy of Christ. And with those lenses, then we cast our vote.
Now, when you mentioned when we talk about like the sovereignty of God, that God is in control of everything, and when I mentioned about the results are God's and everything like that, one thing I just want to ask for a quick aside in talking about sovereignty, because this is one thing I hear a lot of times, especially not so much right now because sports is going on, but anyway, when we talk about like football or some sort of sport. Someone say like, okay, they're praying about, to win. And I will hear a lot of times like God doesn't have time for the results of a football game, to which I will say, yes, he does.
Yeah.
And so could you, I know this is like a whole question out of nowhere, but like when we talk about the results of just football games, God is in control of that as well.
Totally right. I mean, Proverbs 16:33 says the lot is cast into the lap, but the Lord determines its outcome. Lots were the Old Testament equivalent to rolling dice. What's more random looking than dice? And yet, the Old Testament says even the seemingly random roll of the dice is determined by God.
It's just something that I hear a lot of times, especially around Super Bowls, whatever like that.
Right.
Yeah, but every part of this life, everything plays a part in God's design. Everything. Yes, there's nothing that's insignificant.
No, yeah, right. And even if football doesn't have eternal value, it's still the scriptures are clear that even over, like you said, every detail of life, nothing is left to chance, nothing is accidental. Yeah. So no, I think that's really crucial for us, right? That's where our hope is. I think the deepest foundation of our hope as believers is that God reigns and he rules and he guides and he governs and he leads and he loves and that's where our hope is.
And going back to as far as when I mentioned about prioritizing and just figuring out which issues, so I would just say for myself when it comes to voting, for me, I'm not a one issue voter, but if I wanted to look at what is at the top, and for me, it is the life issue, abortion in particular, as far as abolishing abortion, that is like at the top of it. And my reasoning for that is because we're talking about the most vulnerable of all. So we're talking about babies who have no voice and no way of defending themselves.
Yeah.
So I think of all of the issues, that is the one that I prioritize at the top, because I think that's the most vulnerable people. Yeah. And all the other issues are, you can't worry about Social Security if you can't get out the womb.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't. Right. So I mean, I'm thinking of it like, first I just want the baby to live first. I want a person to live first before we even start talking about if that person is an illegal immigrant or not, or if they qualify for health care or can get free college or whatever like that. Like, I just want to get out the womb first, and then from that point, then I look at the issues after that.
No, I think you're right, man. I think that's really huge. I think that's a really helpful paradigm. If someone was like, if someone felt overwhelmed at like, well, I don't know who to vote for. I mean, there's 1,000 different things to look at. It's like, okay, you're right. If you had time to look at one issue, I agree with you, Brian. I think we go to that issue because that gets a lot of flack, right? Other political perspectives, they really dislike that perspective. But to me, it makes so much sense because, that's a worldview issue again, right? I mean, it comes down to, if someone wants to protect the most vulnerable and innocent people on the planet, the most helpless people on the planet, and regardless of what faith they profess, that at the very least is going to indicate that at some level they value life. And if they value life, then so many other things fall into place, right? So many other things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can't, as far as looking at, socioeconomic status and so many, like I said, there's so many other things that are after someone is born.
Yes.
But here we are, at least in America and in so many places around the globe, where people are not even given that chance to even have to worry about those other issues because they're killed before they even get out of the womb.
Yeah, so precisely. And you know what? And I had a list of like 1, 2, 3, 4, like 6 things of like, okay, well, here's the kind of candidate, if you're going to vote, here are the kind of, if you had to boil it down to 5 or 6 things, here they are. But for me, number 1 on the list again is that they have to value life, and again, from a Christian perspective, the reason why life is so valuable and unique and set apart and different, why yes, dogs are valuable, but the difference between human and dogs is that humans, according to Genesis 1:26 through 28, humans alone are created in the image of God. We are image bearers. We are created in the image and likeness of God to display God and reflect God, and there is a particular value placed on human life. And if someone vows to protect and uphold human life, so many things fall into place, right? If they value human life, they're going to be pro-work. They're going to want to help make a kind of economy that there will be jobs for those people who made it out of the womb to work in, right?
Yes.
And they're going to want to they're going to have views on marriage that will allow people that made it out of the womb, to be married, and so. So I think it's a massive issue, foundational.
Commentary as subtle as a sledgehammer. This is Trend Chat.
Hey guys, this is Morgan Zegers, the founder and CEO of Young Americans Against Socialism. We are a nonprofit organization working to preserve a free, fair, and prosperous America for generations to come, all by equipping our generation with the truth about socialism. If you are interested in watching our educational videos, donating to the cause, joining the Ask Coalition, or becoming a contributor, you can do all of these things at fightsocialism.org. We hope you'll join us in this crucial fight for the future of our great country. Thanks!
Hey, it's Lawrence Jones with Fox News. Check out Trend Chat with my brother Brian Bledsoe.
So now that we're about almost 30 minutes in, and so I will say now for people maybe listening, this may get a little more controversial if it hasn't already. So in talking about, we're just talking about abortion and other issues. Now, an issue that tends to come up where you will have a section of Christians that would totally disregard what we're talking about as far as issues because they believe in separation of church and state.
Yeah.
Now, I would, for one, that whole issue, I don't know, for the people that listen that believe in that, or I don't know if they know this, because that comes from, mainly, it comes from a letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist talking about that particular issue. And that has been, I would say, grossly misinterpreted, to mean that there is some sort of, basically leave your theology at the door and then go vote however you want to.
Yeah. That's the problem with that perspective is that, we all have a worldview and we can't check the worldview at the door, right? So we are always going to, again, our worldview is the interpretive lenses by which we make sense of the world, and so, our worldview is always going to inform, decisions that we make. And so, I think it would be, foolish and short-sighted for a professing Christian to go, well, you know what, I don't want, if this is what you meant, for someone to say, look, I don't want, my spiritual beliefs to impact how I vote. I want to be neutral in this. Well, that doesn't work. There's no such thing as a neutral decision. Every decision we make is at some level a moral decision. So, I would definitely encourage believers to, all professing Christians to, as we've been talking about, vote your theology. Let the scriptures infiltrate, every voting decision that you make. You've got to, and I think that's really crucial.
Yeah, and when I hear that, the one thing that comes to mind for me is that, okay, and it's also the argument that I think of when it comes to abortion, just to bring that back up again, is that, okay, do you actually believe what you believe to be true?
Right. And
do you believe it to be true for everyone? Because then it goes back to the absolute truth as well. So, because if you believe this to be true, and also, like I said, I'll bring this up as an argument for, to when someone brings up about abortion, like, well, do you believe murder is wrong?
Right.
And they're like, yes, I believe it's wrong. But okay, so if you believe it's wrong, then why do you not see that when it comes to abortion? If you actually believe that it's murder and believe in, what's going on as far as the procedures of abortion, which, so yeah.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, I think that would be inconsistent at best. And that's, I think I know that there is a better way to go. Let your theology inform your voting.
So if those people, I know another argument they would mention the ones that believe in the separation of church and state, where they would use a scripture like "Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's," and use that verse to justify separation of church and state.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, separation of church and state's a complex issue, but that thing there, that's. The whole issue of being Christians under a government, under a non-Christian government, it's a complex thing, right? And yet, what's so genius about Christ's statement there, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. What's so ingenious about that is that he gives us a paradigm for how to live as those who have him as our highest allegiance. And yet, although we are Christians who have Christ as our highest allegiance, he gives us a paradigm for how we may respectfully and wisely live in a culture ruled by authorities that are not Christian. So sure, there are certain levels where the government does not have the right to tell us what we can and cannot believe as Christians or Muslims. They can't, I would hold that across the board. I disagree with Islam. I disagree with Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses. I do not think those are right. I do not believe those are truth. At the same time, though, separation of church and state demands that the government is hands off when it comes to how they worship. So yeah, I think that would be a misapplication of that scripture at best.
Yeah, but it's just I guess when it comes to particular issues, and I feel like so whether it's talking about the abortion issue or maybe it's separation of church and state, like I feel like there are a number of issues that are there are inconsistencies when it comes to as far as how they're voting one way, which is inconsistent to what their worldview and what their theology is. And I think this idea of separation of church and state, and also wanting to, also another thing that I've noticed too is when it comes to talking about taxation as well. And I feel like those are the issues that are kind of being misinterpreted in the sense. And so like when I mentioned about taxation, where you will have people that see taxation as some form of charity, or just see the government in general as a form, as a charitable organization in a way. So they have no problem as far as using government and basically replacing replacing the church as far as caring for the community. Yeah.
It's a complex issue, right? There are so many things to hold in balance, and so many things that may not necessarily have chapter and verse, in the Bible, and so we have to operate, wisely off of principles, and these are really complex issues, and you're right. There, each one of these things that you could argue either way, and how do churches operate? How does there's it seems like the best you can say is that, okay, you know what? We always have to walk a line of tension as the church in our partnership and cooperation with the government that rules us, right? Because, the New Testament is clear. Christians, we are to respect the governing authorities. We are to honor them. We are to respect them. We are to do what they tell us to do. We're going to be obedient to them. Until or unless the governing authorities call us to do something that is contrary to Scripture. So, I respect government leaders. I respect political leaders. I want to submit to them. I want to obey them. and I'm going to do what I can to make their job easier. And yet, when push comes to shove, when there is political governmental overreach, that's when we have to put our foot down. So these are tough issues for sure.
Yeah, and especially this year as far as with everything with COVID and all that, and so that has really been an issue.
Sure has.
I guess for people that don't know, so you went to Master Seminary, so
That's
you
right.
know firsthand of Pastor John MacArthur and what was going on there.
Yes. Yeah, and I really appreciate, what he has said, in particular, with the situation of the whole thing with COVID, look, it's tough, very, MacArthur and Grace Community Church have been very public and explicit about their obedience and submission and appreciation for the governing authorities, and they have been for decades. And it became clear that this was overreach, and I really appreciate what MacArthur said. He goes, what, the church has to be the church. The church has to be the church. There were calls that the local governing authorities in Southern California were making that was not their call to make, and so eventually, and I think they worked hard, and we did here down in Texas. We worked hard to keep our ear to the tracks. Okay, all right. Well, what is Governor Abbott asking of churches? I paid attention to that. I want to honor him in his position, and yet sooner or later the church has to be the church, and we answer ultimately to Christ, who is the head of the church. He is he has all authority in heaven and on earth, and so these are challenging days to be a Christian and to be a part of a church.
I guess in going back a little bit about when you have churches where it seems like, for one, the church should be the one as far as taking care of people in the community. And am I right?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. That's a complex issue too. Paul makes clear in Galatians 6. He says, let us do good to all, especially to the household of faith. What does that mean? Well, he's saying that the church, again, the church is to do what they can to help anyone in need. But then, he has that sort of, emphatic clause, especially to the household of faith. This is probably something that there's a lot of disagreement about this, and not everyone has to accept what I'm about to say. I think first and foremost, the church has to take care of their own people, not to the exclusion of anyone in the community per se, but first and foremost, we are to make sure that the people of our own household, so to speak, the people of our own churches are taken care of, that widows are being cared for, widows in our congregation are being cared for, that if there's someone in a financial crisis or someone in a job crisis that in our church, that we need to take care of them first. And what I love about that is that Christ also makes clear in John 13 and in John 17 that when Christians in the same church love one another well, that actually is a profound witness to the outside world. That if the outside world, the culture, non-Christians in the world can see Christians in their churches loving each other and taking care of each other well, that is a profound witness and reveals and displays the love of God. Now, one single church, obviously, and this is not what you're saying, but one single church can't obliterate poverty from a city, right? There's not one church that can take care of all social problems. But I think each individual church has to wisely consider how they can uniquely help and assist the community and love the community in which they are in. Not one church can do everything, but maybe a church can do one thing really well. So I think first, take care of your own, make sure your own people are doing well, and then do what you can in the community That might be really driven by just the neighborhood that you're in, the region that you're in, and do what you can to make an impact where you're at.
So I guess one last thing before we move on. It's just where for me, I feel like we've gotten to the point because, as you just said, I mean, at this point, it's not like if everything just switched tomorrow, the church could take over as far as what most of the government is involved with now.
Right.
But in the past, I will probably go back 100 years. It seems like the people in the church have kind of basically have everything upside down, to where you have the churches almost usurp their duty to take care of the community and have pushed that on to the government.
I see.
And now all the stuff that we should be doing, and like I said, if we were to get back to that, that would have to take time to reverse.
Yeah.
But we have cultivated a culture now to where we're not even considering that, where we have accepted that that's their job. But no, that's not the case. That's what we were supposed to do, but we have given that up.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you sound a good alarm for us. You know what I mean? It is easy to kind of sit on our leaves a little bit, sit on our thumbs and go, oh, you know what? Well, the government's going to take care of that. And I think you're right. I think, each individual church should look strategically at specific opportunities that are around them to be at the front end of providing, some kind of special, unique service to the community in which they live. I think you're right. I think you sound a good warning for us to have to really be mindful of how we as the church can not only help with physical, financial kinds of needs, but in addition to that, spiritual, right? Because that's what we're after. As the church, we are not just doing social good. We want to do good in society. We want to do good in the culture. But the thing about the church is that, we have sort of the 1-2 punch of, sure, let's take care of some societal needs the best we can with the resources that any church has. At the same time, what we're especially, maybe I could put it that way, especially concerned about are people's eternities. So you're right, Brian. I think at some level it's a both and. Put it this way, as Christians, we care about all suffering, but we care especially about eternal suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, I guess another component to this, I guess kind of going back to talking about taxes, is because if we had a different mindset as far as taxes were to for one, not look at it as where we're giving, like we're just going to vote to have more and more taxes because we feel like we are treating the government as a charity in a sense. And like if we actually kept more of our own money, then we could, give more to the church for them to help out in the community. There go, shrinking the government. And so it kind of gets into where because I am for a decentralized federal government. And so wow. Just to try to decentralize it, limit the government as much as possible, because the more local, the easier it is to be accountable.
That's a great point.
So as opposed to looking at it from like a top down.
Yeah, Brian, that's a great point. I had never heard that before, but that's a really interesting point because as I think about it as a Christian, what's my goal? Is my goal to be, just this is a kind of a separate issue, but think about, okay, we're really, America is increasingly interested in being debt-free, right? Well, as a Christian, the goal is not being debt-free. As a Christian, the goal is generosity. The goal is generosity for what we know as the Great Commission, Christ's mission unfolding in the world to get the gospel to the ends of the earth. So I think that's interesting. I think you make a good point. How can we interact with the government in such a way where, more money that would otherwise go to taxes winds up being channeled to the community from the church. I think that's an interesting point. I had never thought about that.
Yeah, and that's just and so all of that, all of those things are what goes into how I vote now. And these are all things. So, as far as my story, so a lot of things for me as far as being politically involved all came around 2008. As far as, and that was when I just made my faith my own, and because growing up in church, and everything, but actually just kind of going through the motions and pretty much kind of consider, looking back at it now, more of a false convert. And so at that time, that's when I really took it personally, I guess you would say. And so in that time, so around that time, I just wanted to, when it came time to vote, I just wanted to know why I was voting for a person and looking for their policies and platform. And so I would know if someone would ask why you vote for so-and-so, I can tell them why. That's basically how I got started. I wanted to actually explain why I voted for a person. And from that point on, here we are now. I'm talking about it on the podcast.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, you wanted to be an informed voter, and not just an informed voter, but one who is informed by the deepest issues of life. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. Hey everyone, this is Lucia Scaramacchia, and you are listening to Trend Chat.
This is Lacey Williams, the founder and president of Expressions Magazine, letting you know that you can order our quarterly magazine and support female conservatives by visiting express-conservatism.com, or you can follow us on social media. On Instagram with the username of expressions_conservemag, or on Twitter with the handle of @express_conserve. Get your copy today.
This is Trend Chat.
Now, given that being October, and I know a lot of people love to talk about Halloween, but for me personally, I like to talk about because it's Reformation Month.
That's right.
And especially when it comes to October 31st, it's Reformation Day for me.
That's exactly right.
Now, so you've been doing a number of sermons, and I was there when you was talking about John Calvin. And so, but before, I guess, again, to kind of really define our terms. So the Reformation, can you give, I guess, a brief history about what the Reformation is first?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the Reformation was not a single movement led only by one man, but really what it was the sovereign providence of God in history when the gospel, the gospel of Jesus Christ, namely that God is a holy God. He has created us to know him. We are sinners. We only deserve judgment and condemnation because of our sin. God sent a Savior, namely Christ, who died in the place of sinners, and he offers them eternal life through his death. And that salvation that he offers is by grace alone, through faith alone, in him alone. That message of salvation had been long buried under several hundred years of tradition and so the Reformation is when the true gospel again reemerged in history. So on October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther, who was a Catholic monk, he wrote this document called that we know as the 95 Theses. And the 95 Theses were 95 disputations or 95 sort of arguments, things that he wanted to discuss and dispute about with the Catholic Church of which he was a part. There may be Catholics out here listening to this, and so I would welcome you to the conversation, and so please don't take this personally if you're a Roman Catholic. But Martin Luther, hammered these 95 Theses onto the church door to have a discussion about, and really at the end of the day, his bottom line issue is that salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, and it cannot be obtained through human works, merit, or achievement. And that's really the message of the Reformation, that salvation is free and cannot be earned by your works, but only by grace alone.
All right. So I know so at the sermon that I was at when you were talking about John Calvin, it was funny when to see that you were doing a sermon on John Calvin because before I came to the church that day, I was wondering what shirt I was going to wear, and I have a Calvinist shirt. From the movie Calvinist, because I contributed to the Kickstarter for that movie to get made, and so I got a shirt and a mug, and I was going to I didn't know that's what you was going to talk about either.
Oh,
but I
was going to
wear, because I was going to wear the Calvinist shirt. And I was like, nah, that's all right. And then I come in, you talking about John Calvin, like, man, I should have worn a shirt.
You should have went right back home and got your Calvin shirt on. That would have encouraged me so much.
I know. I was like, man, I should just put it on.
That's so great. That's so great.
So your last sermon was on Jan Hus, right?
That's right.
So well, I mean, I guess if you can, give like a brief, a brief word on both, on Calvin and it's hard to give a brief word about Calvin, but a brief word on Calvin and Jan Hus.
Yeah, especially for me too. I'm a preacher, right? So preachers don't do anything. They don't say anything briefly. Yeah. But, John Calvin is 26 years younger than Martin Luther. He came onto the scene, again, a Roman Catholic. He wanted to be a lawyer, and then he fell in love with literature. And, all of a sudden he came in contact with the doctrines of grace, that, again, those, like unconditional election, that God chooses who will be saved, that, the doctrine that God must spiritually awaken a sinner before they can understand the gospel. And again, the reemphasis of the five solas: grace alone, faith alone, in Christ alone, scripture alone. He came in contact with that and eventually got saved and eventually made his home in Geneva, Switzerland, where he was a pastor and he was a trainer of pastors. And I think what's really interesting about Calvin is that, he had a training school there in Geneva. And so not only did he pastor a flock, but he trained pastors to go back into France, many of whom became martyrs. Jan Hus was born in 1373, died in 1415. So he was about 100 years before Luther. He was a Bohemian, or, what is now the Czech Republic. And he was, again, same kind of story where he was a Catholic priest, and he came in contact with the writings of John Wycliffe from England. And John Wycliffe was a pre-reformer, and Wycliffe's writings pointed to the Bible. Hus was deeply impacted by that, himself became a Christian. He had a little chapel actually it wasn't so little. It was, it could hold, 3,000 or 4,000 people in this chapel. And he became this passionate, zealous, lion-hearted preacher of the word there in Czech Republic. And there really was an awakening. There really was what some even might call a revival of sorts in the Czech Republic. He came under scrutiny by the Catholic Church. They had many complaints against him for things that he preached. He was very critical of the priests in his city, who were extremely corrupt. But he was mostly killed for the chief thing that was offensive to the religious powers of the day was his insistence that Christ alone is the head of the church. It was very offensive in that day. Eventually, he had to stand trial. It wasn't much of a trial. It was more of recant or die. They kept him in solitary confinement for about 8 months. Came out as this withered, small man at the age of 42. Just suffered incredibly in this dungeon and would not recant. And so they killed him on July 6th, 1415. And so he and John Wycliffe, I like to put it this way: if Martin Luther pulled the pin of the Reformation, it was men like John Wycliffe and Jan Hus who built the bomb.
All right, so we're at the end, but I do have 2 questions, right quick. And
yeah,
well, one, what is your definition of evangelical?
Yeah,
I mean, you mentioned it earlier, and I mean, we hear it all the time, especially when we're talking about, during the election and all that, we're talking about evangelicals and all. Like, Hey, what is your definition of the word evangelical?
Boy, that's a great question. I know that's a spongy term, and evangelical does not mean what it used to mean, several decades ago. I rarely use the title term for myself, but if you had to push me in a corner and make me define it, I would say, well, since evangelical is from the Greek word euangelizomai, which literally means to preach the gospel. I think that I would define evangelical is that I am a Christian who believes, upholds, and proclaims the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we are all sinners, that we all deserve God's wrath and judgment, and yet at the same time, God loves the human race, and he has sent a Savior to the planet to die in the place of sinners, to be treated as sinners deserve, and to extend to them undeservingly and by sheer grace and mercy the offer of salvation and eternal life. And so that Savior is Jesus Christ himself, and salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And I and others like me hold to the Bible alone as the source of truth. So if I had to define evangelical, I would probably define it as that.
Yeah, and I guess, well, given, like I said, we're talking about the Reformation, and also like the difference between that and Protestants.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. Well, I think at one point in time, those two things, I might be fuzzy on my history, but I think at one point in time, to be an evangelical and to be Protestant, I think those at one time would have been considered the same thing.
Okay, I thought so too.
Yeah. So I really like the word Protestant, right? Because you hear the word protest in there. Christian, we were the first protesters. We were protesting a false gospel that was proclaimed, and so I am a gospel preaching protester.
All right. So the last thing I wanted to mention, I saw that. And I don't know, was it your Facebook page or somewhere? They said that you studied Japanese.
Yes. Yeah. That was my minor in college.
Okay. Yeah. All the reason I mentioned that because I'm thinking of going to Tokyo. Well, this was before COVID, but I'm still thinking about going.
Yeah.
So what should I look for? What if I plan to go in a couple of years at least now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the purpose of your trip, is it business or pleasure?
Pleasure.
Yeah. You know what? The thing is, Japan is an unbelievable country. And Tokyo, I've never been to Tokyo. I've only been to Osaka and Kobe and Kyoto. And those are pretty big cities too. But it's another world, man. And there is so much there to see. I think Japanese culture is super interesting. It's that funny mix of there's ancient things, there's ancient sort of cultural things, and it's in the same city like Tokyo, blended with state of the art, kind of modern technology stuff. So, I would say, if you like baseball at all, this is not top of the list, but if you had 10 things you wanted to do in Tokyo, at least one of the 10 is go to a baseball game. They are so exciting and they are diehard baseball fans. But, if you're not a baseball fan, that's not going to mean much to you. But the food, the food is incredible, so you'll love the food. When I went to Japan, they had a restaurant with those conveyor belt sushi restaurants where it's like little conveyor belts go all around the restaurant. That we didn't have that yet, so I saw that. It blew my mind. I had never seen anything like that.
Oh, okay.
So it's quite the place, man.
Yeah, I missed my opportunity because I was stationed when I was in the Army. I was stationed in South Korea, and I could have gone to Japan. I just didn't go.
Oh man,
and I missed my opportunity. So I'm like, I'm going to go because so I kind of planned the trip about a year and a half ago, thinking, all right, I'm looking to go in a couple of years to go to Japan for a week or two or whatever like that. So when I saw that, I just wanted to ask you.
Totally. You got to do it, man. You got to do it. It's life changing. And, it's one of those things where, they have all of the, conveniences of an American culture. And yet, they're so homogenized. It's, there's very few, Gaijin or Westerners who live there, comparatively speaking, and so it's just a taste of something so radically different from American culture. And that's good for us to get out of sort of our bubble, to get sort of out of our, realm that we're used to, and to be in a place where they drive, on the opposite side of the road, and where they eat food that doesn't resemble anything we've ever had. And, and that's good for us to experience other cultures.
All right. Well, Jerod, if people want to know more about Christ Community Bible Church and want to find you on social media or the church on social media, where would they go?
So they would go to www.ccbiblechurch.com, and you could find out anything about us there. We also have a Instagram hashtag. I don't think it's used a ton, but it's used enough. So I think it's hashtag WeAreCCBC. And we also have our own YouTube channel and Facebook page. We record, we do live streaming on Sundays, and all of the links to everything you would ever need if you wanted to hear and know more could be found on the website. We also offer Bible and theology classes. So as you heard in the beginning, I'm teaching Greek. All of those have been recorded. So if you wanted to learn Greek, you could do that for free. All of those sessions are recorded on video, and you could, we have those kinds of resources that we want to make available to the community.
All right. You know what? I must say, even though we just finished this interview, I would say this definitely like one of my favorite interviews. I mean, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about all of this. And, if we go past 200, we would love to have you back on again.
Oh, I'd love it, man. Thanks. I kind of invited myself on. Thanks for being so kind to me and letting me do this.
Oh no, I would have invited you anyway. This is something I've been wanting to do more of, as far as, and just like I mentioned. So if we go past 200, I would like to do something like this at least once a month, talk about different particular issues or something like that. I'm just saying that now to you. I mean, I don't know what time you have. So, but this is something I would want it to do more in the past. So
likewise.
So yeah, I appreciate it.
Sign me up, whatever part you want me to play and what you're doing, sign me up, man.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, friends, so much.
This is Trend Chat with your host, Brian Bledsoe.
All right. And thanks for Pastor Jerod for joining us. And so, like I said, that was the whole episode going to be pretty much that. But here we are at the end, and given this is the last episode before the election coming up, so wanted to, I guess, give a little bit of what I would hope to happen when we return after the election. So I would in 2016, I was skeptical of President Trump, and because he had no record in the past 3 years, though I've been pleasantly surprised overall in doing what he said. I disagree with the ban on bump stocks and use of tariffs and in trade and executive orders and signing of more government spending, but even with all of that, it has been more of a pause of the Democrats' push towards socialism than either Bush administration, whether it's HW or W. So, and I mean, I know I saw something from a friend on Facebook, and I thought she said it well, especially us as Christians when it comes to voting for Trump. And she says, no, I'm not voting for Trump because he's Christian. I vote for Trump because he creates a landscape for me to live as a Christian. And that's, that sums it up well, because Democrats have shown time and time again to be more and more hostile towards Christians, whether it's they want compliance. They don't want tolerance when it comes to LGBTQ issues. Like, it's fine to be tolerant, but they don't want tolerance. They want compliance, and they have no problem using the government to force it upon you. And either that or something kind of like, you know, with birth control, or as far as just using the power of the government to infringe on your religious liberty. And I mean, we just saw that with Amy Coney Barrett, as far as, and also someone I know from that was with the Heritage Foundation some years ago, Russ Vogt, who were attacked as a Christian just for being Christian and believing in Christian principles. Like with Russ in particular, you had Senator Bernie Sanders out there basically doing the same thing as far as trying to use some sort of religious test to say that, well, he doesn't deserve to be in this position mainly because he's a Christian. And in their mind, they think that being a Christian, that basically disqualifies you, especially if you really believe in some of the things that me and Pastor Jerod were just talking about. And look, also, as I played in the beginning, and also let me also not, I think I forgot to make sure to credit that audio that I played at the beginning. That is from Choice 4-2. And the voice you heard in that very beginning, that was Laura Clausen, who we've had on the podcast a couple of times. So I apologize for not mentioning that after that. But yeah, you can see the video, cause that was audio from a video that was just released recently. And so you can go to Choice 4-2 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They posted on all of them. So, but the Democrats' advocacy for killing innocent lives in the womb, that right there should be enough to notice how callous and cruel this party can be towards innocent lives. So, I mean, after this election, so like if Biden wins, you know, there's going to be some anger. I'm not going to act like no one's going to be mad, and there's going to be tears, and you're going to kind of see this similar reaction to when Hillary lost. You're going to see some people crying and upset and all of that. And, you know, the media and celebrities and the blue check marks on social media are going to eat it up, and they're going to plaster it, just like how we were when Hillary lost and saw all those people crying and all that. Media is going to just take that and run with it. It's going to probably be on Saturday Night Live and to make fun of it all. That being said, I don't think you're going to have any mass violence if Biden wins, you know, compared to if Trump wins, where you have their followers, you know, Biden supporters or people who hate Trump that are pretty much just threatening America that they're going to burn cities down if Trump wins. So, I mean, it's almost like they're holding, you know, the country hostage, kind of like what I mentioned in the last episode. But look, again, as I mentioned in the interview, and I've probably said before, you know, the duty is ours and the results are God. So at this point, you know, we pretty much done all we can do, as far as, being, you know, being Republican, going out doing what you had to do, or on both sides, both sides are working. So, so now it's just up to the count and however long that's going to take. Look, I will also mention this as far as like reasons to vote for Trump. So I will say, like, you know, tax cuts, and I'll bring that up because as soon as you mention that, someone will want to say like, well, that's just for the rich. No, I'm nowhere near rich, and I benefited from the tax cut. So, and that's just something where the media and Democrats are just using that to try to make it seem like it's just for one section of the population, which is not true. And as far as abortion goes, he restored the Mexico City policy, which restricts taxpayer money to fund abortions internationally. And along with that, having constitutionalist judges like the 3 Supreme Court justices, also with lower courts as well, something I mentioned before. And then what he's done with veterans, as far as like veterans VA accountability, and also other things, and taking a stand on illegal immigration, actually building the wall, at least going somewhere with it, and on and on and on. Actually, there's a website called 140reasons.com. And it's basically just 140 reasons why you should vote for Trump. And it's actually more than 140. So I would just say, just check that out. If you haven't voted yet, check that out. And so anyway, this has gone way longer than I think it's probably the longest episode, but that's fine because this is basically, as I mentioned last episode, this is kind of why we even continue to go on this year anyway. And so I guess my last words in this episode will be this, by the next episode, as I mentioned, we'll possibly have a winner, given if there's no long delay of, counting votes and all of that, with all the mail-in balloting, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be an influx of that. I don't know if I mentioned on here before, but I am an alternate election judge in Tarrant County, so I'm going to be there on Election Day. As far as that, setting up the polls, all the stuff and all that. So, I have something. I guess I have a story about that because I never done that before. And but yeah, so either we're going to have 4 more years of President Trump, or basically we're at the beginning of a Biden-Harris, more so Harris, administration. And I pray we don't return to Obama's vision to fundamentally transform this country into some socialistic utopia and, resist the seductive song of free, quote unquote free, envy, jealousy, and instead choose for more personal responsibility and continue to making America great again. So, till next time, after the election, whenever that is, we'll chat with you later.